You know that feeling when, like when a jigsaw puzzle piece almost fits?
Oh, yeah. The worst.
Right. And you just start, like, applying physical pressure to force reality to match your expectation.
Just mashing it in there.
Exactly. And eventually, you either totally ruin the cardboard or you step back and realize the correct piece was just sitting on the table all along.
Yeah, we've all been there.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Our mission today is to explore how to stop forcing those wrong pieces in our own lives. And we're going to do that by looking at a highly specific, deceptively simple piece of source material.
Really specific.
It is. It's this short journal entry published on June 5th, 2026. The author is someone named Eng. And the title is, let me get this right, Notes on Gardening, Part 916, on germinating blue porterweed, Stachytarpheta cayennensis, by seeds.
I mean, for anyone listening who, doesn't have a green thumb, a deeply specific botanical journal entry like that might seem incredibly niche.
Totally. It sounds like a textbook.
Right. But Eng is actually documenting this fundamental shift in strategy. They're chronicling a deliberate evolution in how they propagate this specific plant, the blue porterweed.
Right, the blue porterweed.
Yeah, and the text basically serves as this amazing case study in biomimicry and also overcoming the sunk cost fallacy in your local environment.
So to really get the ingenuity of the strategy Eng finally lands on, we first have to, look at the physical reality of the plant itself.
The frustration of it, really.
Yeah, the utter frustration. Because Eng writes in the entry that blue porterweed seeds are, quote, so tiny that trying to harvest them directly became quite a hassle.
And, when a botanist or an experienced gardener describes a seed as so tiny that it's a hassle, we are generally talking about seeds the size of a grain of sand.
Oh, wow.
Or even smaller, like dust motes. Biologically, plants that produce seeds this small are usually relying on wind dispersal.
Right, or like water runoff or something.
Exactly, water runoff to just scatter them across a massive area. I mean, the plant produces thousands of microscopic seeds with this evolutionary understanding that 99% of them will not survive.
Because they're just so vulnerable?
Yeah, they contain almost no endosperm.
Endosperm.
Yeah, that's the stored food a seed usually relies on to push its first leaves out of the soil. So not only are they difficult to physically handle, but they are also incredibly fragile once planted.
I mean, you just picture a gardener out there in the elements. The wind is blowing, and they're trying to extract these microscopic specks of genetic material from a dried flower with tweezers.
It's maddening.
It becomes a total exercise in futility. Like you sneeze, and an entire generation of plants is just gone.
Right. And the standard human response to that kind of microscopic frustration is what we could call the domination approach.
The domination approach. I like that.
Yeah, because a gardener faced with tiny seeds usually tries to exert more control over the environment.
Could they go inside?
Exactly. They move into a sterile greenhouse, buy finer tweezers, use magnifying glasses. They plant the seeds in these highly controlled, sterilized seed-starting trays.
Just throwing money and plastic at the problem.
Precisely. They fight the microscopic nature of the problem by throwing more tools and artificial barriers at it. But Eng looks at that entire paradigm and just completely changes the parameters of the problem.
Yeah, according to the journal, Eng bypasses the seed extraction entirely.
Completely ignores it.
Right, they just wait for the plant to finish blooming, and they harvest the spent flower stalks, like the larger physical structures that actually hold those tiny seeds.
Stems, basically.
Yeah, and then Eng just cuts these elongated seed-bearing stems into smaller chunks and scatters those chunks directly over an empty flower pot.
Which is just a radical shift in scale.
It really is.
By choosing to interact with the plant on the stalk level rather than the microscopic seed level, Eng is utilizing biomimicry.
Working with nature, not against it.
Exactly. They explicitly write that they scatter these chunks to, quote, let nature take its course. Because in a wild ecosystem, nobody is extracting seeds with tweezers.
Unless there's a very meticulous squirrel out there.
Right. No, the flower stalk just dies. It gets brittle. It snaps off in the wind or, under the weight of an animal, and it falls to the ground.
See, I do want to push back on this slightly, though.
Okay.
Because just chopping up a dead stem and tossing it in an empty pot, that sounds suspiciously like a gardener who just got tired of trying.
You think they just gave up?
Well, is this chunking method really biomimicry, or is it just like laziness masked as a philosophy?
It definitely looks like laziness if we measure success by how much visible effort is being exerted.
Right. Sweating in the garden equals success.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But ecologically, it is strategic efficiency. Those chopped up stems are performing several critical biological functions that Aang would otherwise have to replicate artificially.
Oh, interesting. Like what?
Well, first, the chunks of stem act as a physical anchor. They prevent those dust mote-sized seeds from blowing away in the wind or washing away during a heavy rain.
Oh, that makes sense. A little microscopic windbreak.
Yeah, and second, as that green and brown stem material breaks down on the surface of the soil, it creates a microclimate.
Really? Just from decaying?
Yep. It traps a microscopic layer of humidity right against the soil surface. And remember, those seeds have no stored energy.
Right, the endosperm thing.
Exactly. That humidity is exactly what a seed with no stored energy needs to trigger germination. And finally, as the stem decays, it slowly releases nutrients back into the soil, feeding the seedling once it actually sprouts.
Wow. Okay, so Aang isn't abandoning the plant at all. They are basically outsourcing the labor to the plant's own decaying architecture.
Bingo. By getting out of the plant's way, they're setting up a more robust, biologically supported nursery than they ever would have with a sterile plastic tray.
That's wild. And the context of this journal entry makes that even more compelling, I think. Because this biomimetic approach is clearly not just a sudden fluke.
Not at all.
I mean, the title of the entry is Notes on Gardening, Part 916.
Yeah, part 916. That implies years, if not decades, of meticulous observation.
Right, and within the text of this specific entry, Aang actually references two previous milestones. They mention Part 867, which is where they first discovered how to successfully germinate these seeds in the first place. And they reference an even earlier entry, Part 817, where they were using an entirely different method, propagating the plant by cuttings.
The progression there is fascinating. From part 817 to part 867 to part 916.
It reads like a software developer releasing patch notes for their garden.
It's a great way to put it.
Like Part 817 was the beta version, right? Just figuring out the absolute basics of keeping the plant alive via cuttings. And then Part 867 was this major system update where they unlocked the seed capability.
Yeah, and part 916 is the optimization patch. Streamlining the code to make it run more efficiently with way fewer resources.
Exactly.
And we should note the shift from cuttings in part 817 to seeds in part 867, that represents a massive leap in horticultural complexity.
Why is that? Isn't a cutting easier?
Well, when you propagate a plant by a cutting, you're taking a physical piece of the parent plant, right? Like a stem or a leaf, and you force it to grow new roots. You are essentially creating a biological clone.
Okay, so you skip the whole fragile seed phase.
You bypass the vulnerable germination phase entirely, but it also means the new plant has the exact same genetic vulnerabilities as the parent.
Ah, I see.
Yeah, if the parent plant struggles with, say, a local fungus or a specific temperature drop, the clone will struggle in the exact same way.
So by moving to seeds in Part 867, Aang is engaging in sexual reproduction for the plant. They're introducing genetic shuffling.
Yes, exactly. Seeds allow the plant to adapt. Out of those thousands of tiny seeds, the few that actually manage to germinate and survive in Aang's specific yard, those are the ones with the genetic traits best suited for that exact microclimate.
Survival of the fittest, right in the backyard.
Yep. So when we look at the stalk chunking method in part 916, we aren't just looking at a clever physical trick, we are looking at the culmination of an iterative scientific process.
They iterated their way to laziness. I love it.
Yeah, well, strategic laziness. Aang moved from forcing biological clones to survive to coaxing genetic diversity out of seeds to finally building this biomimetic system that lets those seeds germinate with almost zero human friction.
But, you know, the journal entry drops this detail right in the middle of all this optimization that kind of reframes the entire 900-part journey.
Oh, the twist.
Yeah. Aang confesses that the blue porterweed, quote, isn't my top choice for a flowering plant, end quote.
It completely flips the narrative. All of this intensive, heavily documented mastery is for a backup option.
A backup. Aang explains that the blue porterweed is just being used as a great local alternative to two very specific plants, lavender and salvia.
Lavender, of course.
Yeah, they note that they tried to grow or propagate both of those plants without much success, and lavender in particular is one of those plants that gardeners will just wage absolute war over to try and keep alive.
Oh, it's notorious. Lavender evolved in the Mediterranean. It thrives in arid conditions with poor, rocky, alkaline soil that drains water instantly,
It's a rough living.
basically. It needs a massive amount of intense sunlight and very low humidity. So if a gardener lives in a climate with heavy clay soil, frequent rain, or, high summer humidity, the lavender will inevitably suffer from root rot or fungal diseases.
It just melts.
Exactly. The biological reality of the plant fundamentally clashes with the environmental reality of the garden.
Which usually leads to the gardener spending, like a small fortune trying to terraform their own backyard.
Oh, digging out the clay.
Yeah. They truck in hundreds of pounds of sand and gravel to build raised beds. They adjust the soil pH with lime, all to create this tiny artificial Mediterranean ecosystem just so they can have the aesthetic of lavender.
What you are describing is the sunk cost fallacy manifesting in agriculture.
Yeah.
A gardener invests time, money, and emotional energy into the idea of lavender. And when the plant fails, instead of interpreting that failure as environmental feedback, they view it as a personal challenge.
Right, like I'm not going to let a flower beat me.
Exactly. They invest even more resources to avoid admitting defeat. So Ang's choice to abandon the lavender is actually an exercise in profound pragmatic restraint.
Is let it go.
They recognized that the environment was providing clear feedback. And rather than fighting the environment, they pivoted.
Which reminds me of, like, cooking. If you're hosting a dinner party and you can't source fresh truffles, you don't ruin the entire night trying to force it.
Yeah.
You just pivot to some really good local mushrooms.
That's a perfect analogy.
But I do have to ask, isn't it a little bit sad to just give up on your dream plants?
Well, let's look at what they pivoted to. The Blue Porterweed. When you look at the architecture of these plants, the pivot makes perfect sense visually.
How so?
Lavender, salvia, and blue porterweed all share a very similar structural role in a garden. They produce these tall, vertical spikes of color, usually blues and purples, that rise above the foliage.
Oh, right. They have that same shape.
Yeah, and they act as massive beacons for pollinators, like bees and butterflies. Ang clearly wanted that specific vertical aesthetic and that ecological function in their garden.
But instead of demanding that the specific species of lavender fulfill that role, Eng found a plant that naturally thrives in their local conditions, while providing the exact same architectural and ecological benefits.
Exactly. They decoupled the desired outcome, a purple, pollinator-friendly spike from the stubborn vehicle of the lavender plant.
It's trading a dying ideal for a thriving reality. And by letting go of the sunk cost of the lavender, Eng reached this massive physiological and psychological reward.
Huge relief, I imagine.
Yet the text explicitly states the outcome of this pivot. Eng writes that the blue porterweeds are, quote, thriving with minimal intervention. They even add that the plants essentially grow themselves.
That phrase, essentially grow themselves, is the ultimate goal of working within environmental constraints rather than fighting them.
The holy grail of gardening.
It really is. When you select a plant that is adapted to your local soil biology, your ambient humidity, and your natural rainfall, the garden ceases to be a hospital ward.
You're not just running triage every morning.
Right. You no longer have to provide constant life support. The friction of cultivation disappears, and the system reaches a state of ecological momentum.
Now, there is a specific caveat to that minimal intervention part that I think is worth analyzing.
Okay, what's that?
Well, Eng notes that the plants require very little attention, quote, especially when compared to how they grow in the wild. But then they mention that the one intervention they do still provide is watering them occasionally during the heat wave season.
Mm-hmm.
So if these plants grow in the wild and essentially grow themselves, shouldn't they require absolutely zero attention from a human? Like, why do they need a safety net during a heat wave?
That's a great question, and it highlights this crucial distinction between a native plant in a wild ecosystem and a native plant in human cultivation.
Okay.
Eng specifically mentions scattering the chunks over an empty flower pot.
Right.
A flower pot is a severed, isolated biome. In the wild, a blue porterweed would send its roots deep into the earth, tapping into subterranean capillary networks. It would share fungal networks with surrounding plants.
Oh, like that underground web thing.
The mycelial network, yeah,
Mm-hmm.
which can actually shuttle moisture and nutrients across a field to plants experiencing localized drought.
Wow. And a pot completely eliminates all of that natural infrastructure.
Entirely.
The root system just hits a plastic wall after 10 inches.
Exactly. The plant is geographically restricted by the gardener's aesthetic choice to put it in a container. So because the human has removed the plant from the vast resilient network of the actual earth, the human must take on the responsibility of replacing that deep groundwater during extreme stress events, like a heat wave.
So the intervention isn't about babying a weak plant. It's about compensating for the artificial limitations of the flower pot itself.
Yes, the gardener still has an ethical and practical role in the ecosystem they've curated. But consider the effort to reward ratio here.
Right.
With the lavender, Ang was likely fighting the soil chemistry, fighting the ambient humidity, and fighting the drainage every single day.
An absolute nightmare.
But with the localized blue porterweed, the daily friction is reduced to practically zero. And the intervention is limited to just a splash of water during the most extreme weeks of the summer. The optimization patch is complete.
It really is a masterclass in adaptability.
Mm.
I mean, we started with a 150-word journal entry about a gardener chopping up dead weed stalks. And we basically uncovered a fully articulated philosophy for moving through the world.
It's pretty incredible.
Yeah. We see the genius of biomimicry, looking at how a system naturally functions, like the decay of a flower stalk, and leveraging that organic process instead of trying to dominate it with tweezers and sterile trays.
And we also see the power of iterative mastery, the willingness to just document your processes. From the beta tests of Part 8.17 to the optimizations of Part 9.16, it allows you to track your own evolution.
Because you can't improve a system if you aren't honest about how it's currently performing.
Exactly.
And perhaps most importantly, we see the absolute necessity of overcoming the sunk cost fallacy, recognizing when a goal, no matter how beautiful or idealized it is in your head, is just fundamentally incompatible with your current environment.
Ang gave up the lavender, and in return, they got a garden that thrives with minimal intervention.
Wisdom really is hiding everywhere. And, as we wrap up, I want you listening to think about your own metaphorical garden. Ang is on part 916 of their notes, meticulously tracking what fails and celebrating what works over the course of years. Where in your own life could you benefit from that kind of unashamed, persistent documentation?
What processes are you currently forcing?
Right. Where could you be leaving patch notes for yourself to get better over time? And more importantly, consider your own stubborn ideals. What is your personal lavender? That project, that expectation, or that method that you just keep pouring resources into, even as the environment clearly tells you it isn't working?
It's a tough question to answer.
It really is. What alternative solution, what blue porterweed might absolutely thrive right now if you just gave yourself permission to step back, stop forcing the puzzle piece, and let nature take its course? Take care, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.